Hi, I'm Jimmy Vermeer, one of the internet's most militant, proud, and unapologetic pro-lifers. If you've seen my other YouTube videos, you'll know that whenever I wear a blue hat, I'm speaking as a different person, and when I take the hat off, I'm me again. I'll be doing that again in this video. This time I'm going to be covering the controversial hot-button topic of abortion. I figure one of two things has to be true. Either the pro-life side of the debate is completely right about everything, and any pro-choice argument can easily be refuted, or the opposite is true, that pro-choicers are right about everything, and every pro-life argument can be easily refuted. Or maybe the correct position is somewhere in between, some sort of compromise position that is superior to either of the two extremes. Let's explore that idea in this video. My blue hat counterpart will ask me a lot of tough questions, and I will be giving equally tough answers. If there are any people present in the room with you who aren't prepared to deal with this issue, perhaps you should stop the video now and watch it later when those people aren't around. If at any point in the video you hear the pro-choicer making an argument so ridiculous that you're tempted to say in the comments, "Oh, come on! Pro-choicers never say that shit. Stop straw-manning." Let me just say that there is no straw-manning going on here. If nobody ever said it, it wouldn't be in here. Everything in this video is based on things that people have actually said in debates. I'll start by saying that the weakest pro-life argument is still better than the best pro-choice argument, so if you even try to debate abortion with me, you've already lost. I believe that when future generations watch this video, they will see that I'm on the right side of history. They will say, "Jimmy was absolutely right. What the hell was wrong with society back in 2018? Much the same way we look back at the days of slavery. Now, I tried to cover the issue from all angles in this video. In a lot of videos that talk about abortion, you really only see one side being presented, and it's very biased. In this video, I present both sides fairly, and I clearly show why the pro-life side wins every single time, and that is why this is the only abortion debate you'll ever need to watch. Now, I'll admit this debate is going to be a little bit different than if I were actually having a debate with a real pro-choicer. They would try to steer this whole discussion in a different direction. But I'm the one who wrote this script, so I'll keep us mostly on track, with the occasional tangent. My goal is to completely destroy the pro-choice side of the debate, but it has become clear after decades of conversing with pro-choicers that I can't do that with one single argument, which is why I've made a roughly 2-hour video to discuss this issue. There are basically 3 types of pro-choicers, with some overlap between the different groups. Those who say a fetus isn't a person, those who say killing a person isn't morally wrong, and those who say that even if it is morally wrong, there shouldn't be any laws against it. I will systematically dismantle all 3 of these arguments. I wish it weren't necessary to make this video, but it is. Just a heads up that some of the stuff covered in this video is very emotional, so I hope you have some tissues handy. Hi, I'm an independent, empowered, progressive, liberal, feminist, atheist woman, and I just came here to tell you that you're wasting your time with all this pro-life, or anti-choice as it would be more aptly called, stuff. The abortion debate is settled. You lost. Deal with it. You want an abortion debate, do you? Okay, let's settle this. Give me every argument you have, and I will counter it with a better argument. But first, let me request that you not refer to us as anti-choice. That misnomer implies that we have a problem with the concept of choice. This is false, as the fetus has no choice in the matter. I'm all in favor of choosing which church you'll attend, if any, choosing what you'll have for dinner, choosing who you want to marry, provided that person also chooses you, choosing what city to live in, and choosing whether or not to vote, and if so, whom to vote for. So I'm not anti-choice, and the debate is clearly not settled, as there are still many people on both sides, And even the U.S. Supreme Court is considering overturning Roe v. Wade. And let's be honest here. If the law were on our side, you pro-abortionists would be kicking up a fuss to have it changed. I mean, that's what you did before, right? So don't even use the "I'm right because the law says so" line on me, because nobody's buying it. Circumcision is also legal, and no decent person would agree with that. Slavery was also legal in the past, so I think we can agree that just because something is legal doesn't make it okay. Third, I couldn't help but notice that you hijacked English words like progressive, liberal, and feminist. You give these words very different meanings than they were originally intended to have. You think that by being pro-life, I am neither progressive, liberal, nor feminist. I beg to differ. And during the course of this video, you'll see why. In fact, if you look up these three words on dictionary.com, you will find that I am in fact more progressive, liberal, and feminist than you are. You're so arrogant thinking that your arguments are better than mine. It's not arrogance, it's reality. Because if your conclusion is wrong, which it is, every argument that leads you to that conclusion must also be wrong. You don't want me to call you anti-choice? Then don't call us pro-abortion. The correct term is pro-choice. Oh, really? Because the vast majority of so-called pro-choicers that I've spoken to really are pro-abortion. They believe that there are situations where elective abortion is the best choice. And if you're really pro-choice, do you support a man's right to choose if he wants to rape a woman? I mean, it's his body. He can choose what to do with it, right? No? Well, then I guess you're not that pro-choice, are you? I think we've established that one similarity between you and me is that we both support some choices but not others. Now, we're specifically talking about abortion, a choice which you support and I do not. It's quite likely that if we were talking about the choice to own or carry a gun, the conversation would go quite a bit differently. Well, I don't believe that abortion is a good choice. I don't like abortion, but I refuse to force my preference on others. We'll see. It seems to me that you think you're taking the moral high ground, but you're not. If you are personally opposed to abortion for moral reasons, wouldn't that same moral argument dictate that you should also be opposed to other people getting abortions? This is what Nazi Germany was all about. The German people didn't like what Hitler was doing, but he had the power, and it was his choice to kill all those Jews, so that makes it okay, right? Silence and neutrality on any issue does not help the oppressed. It only helps the oppressor. In my opinion, governments should restrict abortions, because it is their duty to protect the most vulnerable citizens who cannot speak for themselves. So you think women who have abortions should just be thrown in jail? That's pretty cruel. It is, but abortion itself is even more cruel. And I don't think the women should go to jail. In fact, most pro-lifers don't want that. The problem is with the doctors who give false information to these women, refuse to admit that what they're really doing is killing a human being, and refuse to allow the women to see the ultrasounds just before their abortions, telling them that the fetus is just an unrecognizable clump of cells, even when it really looks more like a baby than you'd think. These are the same doctors who lied to parents of newborns about the risks versus benefits of circumcision. They just want to make a buck, and don't care who they hurt to get it. Abortion should be legal, period. End of discussion. No, wrong and wrong again. Take a look down at the video progress bar. We're just getting started here. What's the point of spelling out punctuation marks anyway? It's very disingenuous when a person says end of discussion or period or I'm not going to argue with you in the hopes that it will shut the other person up, but they really have no intention of ending the discussion themselves. The abortion issue will never be resolved, so why even waste time talking about it? Even if only one person watches this video and decides not to have an abortion, it will be worthwhile having made it. The same applies to all pro-life activities and all pro-life people. Just because I can't convince everyone doesn't mean I shouldn't try to convince anyone. It's not good to talk about abortions because so many people, including many of the people watching this video, have had abortions, and you're just going to make them feel bad about it. You know, two things. Firstly, they should feel bad about it. That's necessary in order for them to change their behavior for the better. I've been through cognitive behavioral therapy, and I've learned all about guilt and shame. And these are good things, not bad things, because they give you a moral compass and help you to make better decisions going forward. Secondly, unless you're my wife, I don't care about your feelings, okay? I care about speaking the truth, doing the right thing, helping people, and saving lives. I don't care about making people who do bad things feel good about it. If you had an abortion, shame on you. I don't hate you, and I'm not condemning you, but I hate what you did. So shame on you, do better in the future, and we can still be friends. You know, it's like saying we shouldn't talk about drinking and driving because people who drink and drive are just going to feel bad about it. Well, they should! You could apply the same logic to any other undesirable behavior you like. I think a woman should have the right to choose whether or not, and if so, when, to become a mother. Why should women alone have that right? Last time I checked, it takes 2 people to make a baby. How about this? If either parent, mother or father, decides that they don't want to have a baby, they need to sign a document saying they consent to an abortion, but if the other parent doesn't sign it, then you have to have the baby, the other parent gets full custody of the child, and you have to pay child support. I'll admit this isn't an ideal scenario, and it wasn't even my idea, but it's still better than the status quo. We need a law. Why is this issue even important to you? If you don't like abortions, just don't get one. It's a human rights issue, and it actually affects all people because all people started off as fetuses. Would you apply that same logic to other things? Like, if you don't like rape, don't rape anybody? If you don't like slavery, don't own slaves? If you don't like circumcision, don't circumcise your kids? If you don't like theft, just don't steal stuff? How about this? If you don't like when people post opinions on social media that you disagree with, don't ever post something that somebody else might disagree with. But it's okay if other people do those things because it's their choice? Look, I'll spell it out for you as follows. The pro-life argument hinges on 2 points, both of which will be spelled out in more detail throughout this debate. First, it is morally wrong to intentionally take an innocent person's life. Second, an unborn baby is a living, innocent person. There are generally 4 types of pro-choice people. Those who disagree with the first point, those who disagree with the second point, those who disagree with both points, and those who, even if they agreed with both points, still don't think legality and morality should be conflated. Now, if killing an innocent person isn't wrong, then can I kill you? I mean, since your life has no value to me, it should be fine if I kill you, right? Relax. I'm not about to kill anyone. I'm pro-life, remember? But by your logic, it would be fine if I did. And if you don't believe life begins at conception, let's take a look at the scientific definition of life, shall we? You people claim to be big believers in science, right? First, what makes you different from other people? Your DNA, right? At what point did your unique DNA come into existence? Your father's DNA is different from yours because only half of his DNA went into making you. And the same is true of your mother. When a cell was created that contained half of your father's DNA and half of your mother's DNA, that cell was you. Second, the law of biogenesis says that species reproduce after their own kind. If you're a human, your parents are human. If you're a cat, your parents are cats. And if you're a frog, your parents are frogs. So what kind of life is an unborn baby in a human mother's body? It can only be human and nothing else. Third, the cell that was created when you were conceived grows and becomes multiple cells. This growth would not be possible if you weren't alive. For example, that flake of dandruff from your hair. Fourth, an embryo has the ability to digest food. Fifth, an embryo reacts to stimuli. Sixth, the cells in an embryo are capable of reproducing via cell division. The aforementioned combination of characteristics make the embryo alive and human. So you pro-choicers like to accuse us of being science deniers, but I've shown that it's really you who are the science deniers. Now let's look at the things pro-choicers tend to point out when they distinguish between an unborn baby and a post-birth baby, or person at any age after birth. First, size. It has been said of many things that size doesn't matter. An unborn baby is physically smaller than a born baby. Similarly, a 9-year-old is smaller than an 18-year-old. This does not make it okay to kill a 9-year-old, so it logically follows that it also doesn't make it okay to kill an unborn baby. Second, level of development. The same exact logic applies as to the size argument. Third, location. One is inside the woman's body, the other is not. Would it be okay for me to kill some people but not others based on where they are? Like, it's okay to kill someone in a grocery store, but not okay for me to kill someone out in the street? Is there something magical about the birth process that transforms a baby from some worthless dead animal to a living person with full human rights, at least if it's a girl? Fourth, degree of dependency. Much of the pro-choice argument hinges on the concept of viability. They think this is their trump card, the one argument that defeats every pro-life argument. This is a bunch of nonsense, and I'll show you why. Sure, an unborn baby, at least up to a certain point in the pregnancy, depends on the mother's body to sustain its life. There's that word life again, the life that you deny exists. If a baby is born prematurely, they hook him or her up to a machine to keep him or her alive. But you know, a young person up to ages that can range from 13 to 18 or so are at least to some extent dependent on their parents or other people to help them live. A 9-year-old can't graduate from college, get a full-time job, buy a house, etc. Does that make it okay to kill a 9-year-old? Even people at all stages of life are dependent on other people. Are you a farmer? If not, you depend on farmers to provide you with food. Are you a doctor? If not, you depend on doctors to provide you with health care. You depend on dentists to take care of your oral health. You depend on your telephone provider to be able to contact the other people you depend on. I could go on. So in that sense, everybody depends on somebody else. Where do you draw the line? Anytime you draw a line at any point other than conception, you're drawing a line that could apply to some adults. So anytime you pro-choicers try to say that a fetus isn't a person, you're really just committing hate speech. Anytime you want to take away a person's rights, you have to dehumanize your victim in order to make your injustice seem okay. Slave owners believed that their slaves, or Negroes as they were commonly called, were not people. Women were denied the right to vote because legally they were not people. The Nazis justified their atrocities by saying that their victims were not people. But much has changed since then. Now, instead of Negroes, cripples, retards, fags, we have people of color, people with disabilities, people with mental disabilities, and gay people. We still have a long way to go if we are to stamp out all injustice in the world. It starts by first and foremost acknowledging that people are people. We pro-lifers have a thing called the toddler test. Basically what this is whenever a pro-choicer makes any argument at all, say, for example, some women should be allowed to have abortions because they are poor and can't afford to give their children the quality of life they deserve. There will always be dire situations in which some women may have to choose the option of abortion. We would just counter it with applying the same logic to a toddler. So if you lose your job, as I did, and you have a 3-year-old that you can no longer afford to support, should you then kill your 3-year-old so that it won't have to suffer poverty? You'd probably get thrown in jail for 25 years if you tried that. If you can't think of a good enough reason to kill a baby after birth, then you can't think of a good enough reason to kill a baby before birth either. No. A much better solution would be to give that child up for adoption. There's no shortage of people willing and able to adopt babies. To put things into perspective, in the USA in 2009, there were 555,000 married couples looking to adopt, but only 22,000 babies were adopted, according to the National Council for Adoption. And remember earlier when I said the vast majority of pro-choicers are actually pro-abortion, and you said you weren't? Well, you just proved my point by making that argument. It's a fact that lots of people who were poor or grew up in foster care still want to live and are even pro-life themselves, so don't pretend that you're looking out for their best interests by supporting abortion. You're only looking out for yourself. I'm sure they don't appreciate being told that they would be better off dead. Oh, if you think adoption is so great, why don't you adopt a baby? Okay, send 1 or 2 my way and I'll adopt them. People only want to adopt healthy white babies. Disabled babies or babies of color are not wanted. The vast majority of people who are willing to adopt babies don't care what color he or she is and will still love them even if they have a disability. I don't know where you're getting that from. You keep referring to fetuses as babies, but by definition it's not a baby until it's born. I looked up the word baby on dictionary.com, and one of the definitions allows for it to be used to refer to people who haven't been born yet. So even abortionists can agree with me that what they are doing is killing babies. Your examples about slavery and circumcision are not valid analogies, because first of all, slavery isn't legal, and I don't care if it ever was in the past, we're talking about right now. And secondly, I have yet to see anyone trying to make circumcision illegal. Are you kidding me? First, what makes you think this moment in history is somehow so unique that current laws are the only laws that align with moral absolutes? Second, haven't you noticed the vast numbers of intactivists fighting hard to make circumcision illegal? Here's a clue for you. I'm one of them. Actually, most scientists agree that a life begins when the baby could viably live outside the womb. First of all, I'm highly skeptical of your claim that most scientists would make such an unscientific claim. And even if they did, it sounds to me like it's really just an excuse to justify shedding innocent blood. I think abortion is okay because an unwanted child may be a burden to people. There are lots of people who pose a burden to someone. For example, an abortionist poses an unwanted burden on a fetus. Furthermore, there are no unwanted children, just unwanted pregnancies, because being unwanted isn't a condition of the fetus, it's a condition of the wrong attitude of the mother. As I just said, there are lots of people who are willing to adopt children. If someone being unwanted was sufficient justification for killing that person, then what if I don't want you here? Can I kill you? No. I'm glad you answered that question because I have no interest in actually killing you. If I killed every person who ever inconvenienced me, I would be the most notorious serial killer in decades. I think abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Why rare? If abortion is, as you claim, no big deal, then they should be handing out abortions on every street corner. But abortion is a big deal, and it should not only be rare, it should be unthinkable. And being legal doesn't make it safe. Even at Planned Parenthood, mothers have been known to die as a result of botched abortions. I think abortion is okay because my doctor said so. Your doctor is also paid to kill babies. He or she is no different from a mafia-hired gun. In order to become a doctor, you must swear a version of the Hippocratic Oath stating, among other things, that you will do no harm. The original version of the Hippocratic Oath even specifically mentions abortion as one of the things a doctor should refrain from doing. Now let me tell you about my personal experience with doctors. When my wife was pregnant, still very early on in the pregnancy, before we knew the sex of our baby, a doctor at Juravinsky Hospital in Hamilton told her that her unborn baby had died, and they offered to do a D&C. That is, they offered to suck out the dead baby's remains from my wife's uterus. She refused. And it's a good thing too, because that baby was not dead. My wife ended up giving birth to my daughter, who is now as alive and healthy as can be. Never trust doctors. I wonder how many women have been lied to like this and unwittingly allowed their living babies to be killed, thinking they were already dead. I know that my case is not an isolated incident. A similar thing happened to Ariane Korpstein. You can look it up if you don't believe me. That's ARIANN space CORPSTEIN. If you cut off my reproductive rights, I'll cut off yours. You're not doing yourself any favors stooping to that level. I'm trying to do a good thing here by... I lost this part of my script, I'm sorry. I'm trying to save lives, and you're threatening to mutilate my penis. George Carlin was the greatest comedian of all time, and he said abortion is okay. He also said it was okay for religious people to kill each other off, so I wouldn't consider him to be any kind of moral authority. Comedy may be the only thing George Carlin was good at. Anyway, I have seen his video where he defends abortion, and every single point he makes in that video is wrong. Now, he did a monologue on the issue, not giving the other side a chance to refute his weak arguments. All he had was an audience full of lunatics cheering on his hate speech. Let's go through his points one by one. Why doesn't the census count fetuses? Because the census is a government institution, not a scientific force. Census workers can't always tell if a woman is pregnant, especially if she's still early on in her pregnancy. And she could also lie to them, so including fetuses in the census would give some very imprecise results. Pro-choice women are way better looking than pro-life women. I'm not sure where you're getting this misinformation from, but some of the most beautiful women I've ever met are pro-life. Why don't they have a funeral after a miscarriage? Some people do, but as for the ones who don't, it's because funerals are expensive. If funerals were free, lots of people would have funerals after a miscarriage. Why do people who are expecting say, "We have 2 children and 1 on the way," instead of, "We have 3 children"? Or why do people say, "I'm going to become a mother or a father or a grandmother," etc., instead of, "I am a mother or a father," etc.? Because the language people in general use is influenced by the media. As for myself personally, I said I was a father as soon as I found out my wife was pregnant. Talking about how the media influences language, the media often frames the abortion debate as being about reproductive rights. I say, screw the euphemisms. We're not talking about reproductive rights or reproductive health care here. We're talking about murder. Also, if you want to talk about the language people use, what about people who refer to pregnancy as being with child? How can you be considered with child if what's inside you isn't a child? And why do pregnant women wear shirts with signs that say baby on board? Everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows that's a baby in there. Do you believe life begins at conception? Yes, I do. It's not just what I believe, it's what science says. Well, actually, life began about 1 billion years ago, and it's a continuous process, and it just keeps rolling and rolling along. Now you're conflating individual life with life in general. My life began 41 years ago. Before that, it was a different life. Life would not exist without carbon atoms, so maybe we shouldn't be burning all this coal? I'm not a big fan of burning coal, but not for that reason. George Carlin just keeps getting dumber every time he talks. Can we move on to a different line of reasoning? Okay, I'll admit that one was subpar, but Carlin still got some good points. Like how inconsistent you are with your fertilization argument. You know, whenever a woman has a period, any fertilized eggs that haven't made it to her uterus get flushed out once a month during those delightful few days she has. So any woman who's had more than one period is a serial killer, right? No, you're missing the point. Abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn baby. We can't fault anyone for a baby unintentionally dying as a result of a natural process. There's nothing inconsistent about that, as George Carlin claims. You know, pregnancy doesn't begin at conception, right? Pregnancy begins a few days after that, when the fertilized egg makes its way into the uterus. Redefining when pregnancy begins isn't going to get you off the hook as to when life begins. If you think a fetus is more important than a woman, try getting a fetus to wash your underwear for no pay and no pension. I never said a fetus was more important than a woman. What I said was the right to life is more important than the right to choose, no matter which person we're talking about. Why do you think life is so sacred? Because God says so? Hasn't history shown that God is one of the leading causes of death? Again, I wasn't going to bring God into the debate. That's you who keeps doing that. So, 2 things. First, we are interested in protecting human life because everyone deserves a chance at life, not just because of some religious reason. Second, as much as you may think God is a leading cause of death, if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that God is also the leading cause of life. But let's get back on topic. The only reason you care so much about life is because you're alive, which makes your point of view biased. The whole concept of the sanctity of life is a self-serving, made-up story, and I don't buy it. It's irrational to care about non-existent people. Oh, really? You're calling us self-serving? Let me remind you that the basic difference between pro-lifers and pro-choicers is that pro-lifers are working to save the lives of other people, while pro-choicers are trying to make their own lives more comfortable. So tell me again, which one of us is the selfish one? You're calling dead people non-existent, but in reality they did exist before you killed them. If everything that ever lived is dead, and everything that's alive will eventually die, then where does the sacred part come in? Why does life matter at all? I'm having trouble with that. Life is important because of what a person can do while they're alive. A living person can grow up to produce children of their own. A living person can make scientific discoveries and accomplish great things. A living person can develop cures for illnesses. A living person can take care of the needs of another living person. A dead person can't do any of those things. If all lives matter, as your sign states, Why do you eat chicken? Chickens are babies too. Chickens exist to provide food for humans. I'm talking about human lives, and we can discuss veganism in another video. And don't pretend you care about the chicken's life because you eat chicken too. You shouldn't say all lives matter. That makes you a white supremacist. Even though many of the lives I'm trying to save are black? Nice try. Not. I don't know for sure when life begins. It might not be a life until 3 months. If you're not sure, it's taking a terrible risk with someone else's life. If I was a construction worker and I said to you that I had to blow up a building in a minute in order to start a new construction project, but I said I didn't know if there was still anyone in that house, what would you say to me? There's no reason to preserve the life of a baby who has birth defects and will have a reduced quality of life. Who's to say they'll have a bad quality of life? Would you kill a 10-year-old child with Down syndrome if it were legal to do so? You have no right to preach at me. Shame on you. I am engaging in a political discussion with you, which I totally have not only the right, but the duty to do. And since I have truth and justice on my side, not shame on me, but hooray for me. What gives you the right to tell me what I can and can't do with my own body? What gives me that right is the fact that we live in a free and democratic society where all people have the right to voice their opinions. Even if I were the only person who felt this way, which I'm not, I'd still have the right to say it. And if the majority of people agree with me, which they partially do, then there's nothing stopping us from pursuing our agenda politically. And there's nothing stopping us from making videos such as this one in an attempt to change people's hearts and minds. And there's nothing wrong with praying for or with people who have difficult choices to make for the same reason. Abortion is okay because a fetus is a parasite. No, it's actually not. A parasite is an organism that lives on or in an organism of another species. Since your baby is the same species as you, he or she is not a parasite. Making abortion illegal is pointless anyway, since women who want abortions will just get them anyway, only in less safe and sanitary conditions using coat hangers and back alleys. They will also give birth in car parks and drop the babies off in dumpsters. That is nonsense, for 4 reasons. First, it has been shown that laws against abortion have saved lives in places like Paraguay. Even Planned Parenthood has admitted this. I posted an article about this on my Facebook timeline a while back, thinking it should silence that particular argument once and for all. But apparently some people still haven't gotten the memo. If laws didn't affect people's behavior, then why do we have any laws at all? Second, even with abortion legal, you still have idiots like Kermit Gosnell who practice abortion in the most unsanitary conditions. In some cases even resulting in the death of the mother and killing babies after they've been born live, which is illegal. I think the scenario of babies being dumped in dumpsters will be extremely rare, but even if that does happen, that's still not worse than abortion. Third, even when abortion was illegal, most of the illegal abortions that were done were still done by a doctor using the same medical equipment they use today. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, one of the co-founders of NARAL, admitted that the abortion industry fabricated the numbers of women who died from unsafe abortions in order to falsely justify the legalization of abortion. Fourth, it's possible that more women are dying today as a result of legal abortion than were dying before its legalization in 1969. Abortion surgery and abortifacient pills, like RU486, do sometimes result in death from continued bleeding or infection. Studies also show a correlation between abortion choice and suicide. Want to keep women from dying? End the abortion culture and support your neighbor through her pregnancy. I also want to add that as much as you like to talk about abortions being safe, there really is no such thing as a safe abortion. Someone always dies. And the women who suffer abortions often have long-lasting psychological damage from the procedure. Even if the doctor dishonestly tells them that what's growing inside of them is a mere clump of cells, no different from a tumor or a parasite, they either know deep down that they are killing an innocent person, or they realize this afterwards when they actually do some research. There's actually a group of people, mostly women, who have either had an abortion or participated in abortion in some way, who deeply regret what happened. They are the Silent No More awareness campaign. They speak at the March for Life in Ottawa every year, and their stories are heartbreaking. You're using appeal to emotion, which is a logical fallacy. Appeal to emotion isn't a logical fallacy in this context. And I'll take my appeal to emotion over your appeal to selfishness any day. Why do you want women to have coat hanger abortions? When I said I was against abortion, that actually includes coat hanger abortions. I'm not sure how you missed that point. You're a man. You can't get pregnant. As such, you have no business even having an opinion about abortion. You know, opinions on abortion are like nipples. Everyone has them, but only women's matter. But all you ever see is men's. Really? That's kind of hypocritical of you, given that, first of all, you have no problem expressing your opinions about circumcision even though you don't have a penis, and second, if I actually agreed with you on abortion, you'd be more than happy to accept my opinion as valid. If some guy were to say, you know, I support a woman's right to choose if she wants an abortion, I highly doubt you would reply to him by saying, shut up, you're a man, so you have no say in this. And if you want to bring nipples into this discussion, let me point out that nipples are for feeding babies, not killing them. My identity, my skin color, my genitalia, my religion, and my socioeconomic status have no bearing whatsoever on what's right and wrong. The people who fought to end slavery were typically wealthy religious white men who did not own slaves. Their opinions on slavery were just as valid as my opinion on abortion. Oh, now you want to debate circumcision with me? Not right now, maybe in another video. Back to the abortion topic. It's none of your freaking business what I choose to do with my body. But it's not just your body. It's also someone else's body that just happens to be inside yours. And I reject the notion that something isn't my business just because you disagree with it. What makes the human species great is that we look out for each other no matter what. What happens to any person is my business. Because you know what? Any minority group that you belong to could be targeted next. And where will be the people who would stick up for your rights? If somebody held a gun to your head and said that they were going to kill you unless I did something to intervene, should I intervene to save your life? Or should I just say, this issue doesn't concern me, it's none of my business? Are you a Christian by any chance? Yes, I am, but... I knew it! I knew it! You're one of those far-right extremist religious nutjobs who wants to force his religion and morality down everyone else's throats. Oh, come on, when did I say that? I've noticed in discussions with pro-choicers, they're always the first ones to bring up religion, not me. Almost every time, guaranteed. If I were debating with a fellow Christian, I might bring up Psalm 139 and other passages, but again, only if they bring it up. I'm pro-life for the same reason everyone should be pro-life. I was a fetus myself once. I'm a Christian for different reasons, and perhaps I will discuss that in another YouTube video someday, but today, let's just focus on the abortion debate, okay? But for those of you Christians watching who want to see religious arguments against abortion, I would highly recommend watching one of Randy Alcorn's videos. That's Alcorn. Great speaker. He covers the religious side of the abortion debate very well, perhaps even better than I could. And I would also like to point out that you don't need to be religious to be a decent person. I like believing in God. I think there's nothing wrong with having faith. But if you think the absence of belief in God gives you the moral authority to kill innocent human beings, then you're an extremely corrupt person. I would like to just mention a few names of notable atheist pro-lifers. Christopher Hitchens, Nat Hentoff, Don Marquis, Arif Ahmed, and even a couple of women, Kelsey Hazard and Ashley Sullivan. That's right, those last two are atheist females who are pro-life. Who could ever have imagined such a thing existed? Because God is good, but you can still be good even if you don't know God. On a side note, I've even seen gay people at the March for Life. Yes, there are gay pro-lifers, and why not? It's not like they're likely to ever get an abortion. Just remember, those who worked to abolish slavery were also called fanatics and told to keep their moral and religious beliefs to themselves. As for your beliefs, you can believe whatever you want. Just please don't harm innocent children. Doctors should not refuse to perform an abortion on religious grounds. That would set a very dangerous precedent. If doctors are forced to perform abortions or else lose their license to practice medicine, many doctors will simply refuse anyway because their morality is worth more than their job. There is already a shortage of good doctors. Why do you want to make this situation worse? Shouldn't there be some separation of church and state? Separation of church and state doesn't mean that the church and the government have to be opposed to each other on every single issue. If that were the case, churches would be illegal. There can be some agreement between religious leaders and government leaders on some issues. Do you think all the laws of the land should be compared to every religious text in existence, whether it be the Bible, the Quran, or something else, and removed from law if it is also banned by some religions? The Bible also condemns rape. By your logic, that would mean rape should be legal. Now, the Bible does forbid anyone to harm a pregnant woman in such a way as to cause her unborn baby to die. In many places, a person who kills or assaults a pregnant woman in such a way as to cause her unborn baby to die is also criminally responsible for the death of the baby, in the case where the baby was wanted by the parents. Well, that makes sense, because a wanted child obviously has more value than an unwanted child. Why should being wanted as opposed to unwanted have any bearing on whether or not you have the right to live or any value as a human being? This argument doesn't hold up to scrutiny when you consider a mother who decides that her bratty 8-year-old child is no longer wanted and chooses to have a very late-term 32nd trimester abortion. There's that toddler test again. Morality is subjective. It's completely made up. There are no moral absolutes, and there is no right and wrong. Is that right? You can't legislate morality. The decision of whether or not to have an abortion is essentially a moral decision, and in a free and democratic society, the conscience of the individual must be paramount and take precedence over that of the state. What are you talking about? Why have any laws at all then? Liberals legislate morality all the time, so why can't we? In fact, all laws are in some way designed to legislate morality. For instance, almost everyone agrees that rape is immoral and should therefore be illegal. Why should that argument apply to some moral values but not others? When you say that there are no moral absolutes, you're on a slippery slope. The slippery slope is a logical fallacy and a myth. No, it's not. Take a look at the case of Katrina Effort, an Alberta woman who basically got off scot-free after murdering her newborn son because, as Justice Joanne Veit put it, Canada accepts abortion. Even Peter Singer, the ethicist who advocates killing disabled newborns, said there is no sharp distinction between the fetus and the newborn baby. If acceptance of abortion leads to acceptance of infanticide, then if you follow that to its natural conclusion, no sharp distinction between a newborn and a 1-year-old, etc., etc., would also be acceptable for a woman to kill her full-grown adult son. Where do you draw the line?
If you people are so pro-life, then how do you explain the crusades or residential schools? You people are whacked right out.
I honestly don't remember participating in either of these atrocities. In fact, this shit happened before I was born, so don't blame me for stuff that's not my fault.
The church has no business trying to force its morality into a law over a healthcare issue.
Abortion isn't healthcare, as much as pro-choicers like to pretend it is. Healthcare makes people healthier, happier, and live longer. Abortion does the exact opposite. And it's not just churches trying to put an end to this atrocity. Decent people of all religious and non-religious groups oppose abortion.
For me, this is a healthcare issue. Across the globe, 350,000 to 500,000 women die in childbirth each year, while another 9 million children never live to see their 5th birthday. It is estimated that family planning could prevent 25% of maternal and child deaths in the developing world by preventing high-risk births that are too close together, too early, or too late in a woman's life. Every year, an estimated 74,000 women around the world die as a result of unsafe abortions.
I would respond to this with 4 points. First, all your statistics fail to point out one obvious thing. Abortion results in a 100% mortality rate among those being aborted. The number of children who will not live to see their 5th birthday will be much higher if those children are all aborted. These stats came from an NDP MP, who is very likely just towing the party line. Second, the vast majority of abortions are not done for health reasons, and it's wrong to use the marginal cases to justify the killing of so many innocent people. Third, even the abortions that are done for health reasons are in almost every case unnecessary, as an emergency C-section would also terminate the pregnancy without necessarily killing the baby. The vast majority of abortions are done for the simple reason that the mother does not feel like taking care of a baby. And if that's not a good enough reason to kill a child that's been born already, then it's not a good enough reason to kill an unborn child either. Fourth, your statistics fail to point out the number of women who die either as a direct result of a botched abortion or complications following an abortion, including mental health issues. I also think the term family planning is a misnomer. You're not planning a family, you're killing your family.
Access to abortion is fundamental to supporting and empowering women to ensure they can carry safe pregnancies.
That is incorrect. Women who have had abortions or IUDs are less likely to be able to carry safe pregnancies going forward, as the abortion procedure often damages the woman's reproductive organs.
Whatever. I think you should just keep your rosaries away from my ovaries.
First of all, I'm not Roman Catholic, so I don't even use rosaries, but thanks for coming out. And as I said before, this isn't a religious argument. This is about human rights, something people of all religious stripes should be concerned with. Although most pro-lifers are inspired by their faith. Here's a picture of an aborted fetus at 10 weeks. Is that upside down? Dumb. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Which is roughly the stage when most abortions occur. You can't tell me that doesn't look like a baby. Well, you could, but you'd be wrong as usual.
You need to stop publicly showing pictures of aborted fetuses. That's just ugly and nobody needs to see that. Can't we just have a civil discussion without resorting to graphic images?
It is gross, and people do need to see it. People thought the same thing about pictures depicting slavery, or the Holocaust, or even animal abuse, if you will. If it's that ugly, maybe we should do something about it, instead of whining about how ugly it is. Studies have shown that negative feelings towards abortion increased by 90% among those who were shown these images. It's like what they say about slaughterhouses. If slaughterhouses had glass walls, we'd all be vegan. I wish abortion clinics had glass walls. Why do you think it's so graphic and disturbing if all this is, in your own words, is a formless, non-living blob of cells? A horrible injustice is being done, and your priorities are out of whack if instead of complaining about the injustice itself, you're complaining about the fact that I showed you a picture of it. You're sick of seeing these pictures? So am I. Let's stop killing babies so we won't have to show the pictures anymore. If you're okay with abortion, you deserve to be offended by seeing these pictures. Do you know who William Wilberforce is?
Never heard of him. Friend of yours?
Well, he was a bit before my time, but he was the British MP who helped to abolish slavery in the United Kingdom by showing graphic images depicting slaves being mistreated. Most white people simply didn't care about the issue up to that point because they weren't exposed to the reality of what was going on. Out of sight, out of mind. But once they saw the reality of what was happening, they started to feel sympathy for the black slaves, and eventually they allowed slavery to be abolished. The same can be true for abortion. If people would simply open their eyes and pay attention to what's really happening, they should take pity on the people being senselessly murdered in abortion clinics. All you need to do is visit the website of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, www.endthekilling.ca. There are lots of pictures there. To quote William Wilberforce, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know. If you still aren't convinced that showing ugly pictures will help to put a stop to injustice, let me tell you about Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black guy from Chicago who went to visit relatives in Mississippi in 1955. He was not aware of just how much blacks were hated in Mississippi back then, and he spoke to a white woman at a store. Exactly what was said is not certain, but what we do know is that the woman lied about the encounter, saying that he'd grabbed her waist and said obscene things to her, which she later admitted wasn't true. Her husband and another white guy got wind of this and abducted Emmett Till from his relative's home, and he was soon found dead at the bottom of the Tallahatchie River, covered head to toe in cuts and bruises, his face horribly disfigured. When his body was returned to his mother in Chicago, she insisted on an open casket funeral because she wanted everyone to see what they did to her boy. This resulted in a great number of Americans becoming involved in the civil rights movement because, as Time magazine put it, the public could no longer pretend to ignore what they couldn't see. Now, while this story isn't about abortion, the point is that the best way to make a difference in any movement is to show shocking pictures.
Those pictures are fake anyway. There's no way an embryo looks like that in the first trimester.
No, they're not fake. I have better ways to waste my time than subjecting myself to harsh criticism for handing out fake pictures of abortion. Pro-choicers like to deny the sad reality of abortion and what it looks like. Ignorance is bliss. It would have to be, or else how could pro-choicers be able to live with themselves?
Even so, there's no way you can be okay with children seeing those pictures, right?
Wrong again. These images may be frightening to children, but it's better to scare a child once than to let them live their whole lives victimized by a society that accepts abortion. You know, I will agree with you that children shouldn't have to see these pictures, because these pictures shouldn't exist, because abortion shouldn't be a reality. But it is, and they do.
Abortion is gross, but you know what else is just as gross? Giving birth.
That's just a matter of opinion, and I happen to disagree. Nothing could be worse than brutally dismembering a human being at the very start of his or her life, except maybe doing that to multiple babies.
I've noticed that you keep referring to a fetus as a human being, but there is no scientific basis for making such a claim. Embryos and fetuses are not children or babies.
Yes they are. I've already explained that there is a 100% valid basis for calling fetuses human beings. You just don't want to recognize them as such because you just want an excuse to kill them. You can argue all you want about when it becomes a zygote, when it becomes a blastocyst, when it becomes an embryo, when it becomes a fetus, when it becomes a baby, and when it becomes a person, but the reality is, all this is merely semantics, and the only point you're making is that you just want any excuse, such as changing or arguing about the definitions of certain words, to justify the atrocity of killing an innocent person.
I think abortion is a good thing for women in less than ideal family situations, especially single women, drug addicts, or women who are abused by their husbands, because children who grow up in that sort of environment tend to become violent criminals when they're grown up. Crime rates have gone way down since abortion became legal.
Well, of course crime rates will go down when less things are illegal. Now, you're saying that the solution to the problem of violent crime is to commit acts of violence on those who may or may not at some point in the future commit violent crimes? It doesn't take a genius to see the flaw in that logic. By the same logic, you could say that Adam Lanza was a hero because he saved the world from a bunch of potential serial killers. Wait a minute. It is not fair or right to kill a person just because they might grow up to be a criminal.
Adam Lanza wasn't even a real person, and most of these so-called school shootings are just staged with a bunch of phony victims who are paid to make up sob stories.
Don't be such a fucking idiot.
The problem with pro-lifers is they're just opposed to sex. Sex is fun, and it shouldn't come with strings attached.
I'm not opposed to sex. I love sex. Go ahead and have sex all you want, but have sex responsibly. If in the heat of the moment you forget to use birth control or the condom broke for whatever reason and you become pregnant, take responsibility for the life you've helped to create. Because abortion doesn't get you out of being a mother, it just makes you the mother of a dead baby. And you caused this baby's death, which makes you bad at being a mother.
Abortion is a right under the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court said so in Roe v. Wade.
The Supreme Court also at one time upheld the constitutional right to own slaves. That doesn't make it right. If you want to talk about rights, let's take a look at the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which states that we have certain unalienable rights, namely the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You'll notice that life was the very first one on the list. This isn't a random coincidence. The right to life must take precedence over all other rights. And since you brought up Roe v. Wade, I'd like to point out that Norma McCorvey, aka Jane Roe, the plaintiff in Roe v. Wade, has had a change of heart and regrets the case very much. She is now a supporter of human rights from conception to natural death.
But you're saying that a mere blob of cells has more rights than a full-grown woman.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the fetus's right to life must take priority over your right to violate the baby's rights. And if you want to describe someone as being a blob of cells, then when you get down to it, you and I are also blobs of cells. We're just bigger blobs than the ones you want to be able to kill. And to be perfectly honest, regarding the blob of cells argument, most abortions happen after the 7-week mark, when the fetus has already developed into something that looks human, and, as I said, from the point of conception is human.
Nothing should ever trump a woman's right to bodily autonomy.
Since when did your bodily autonomy take priority over the most fundamental of all human rights?
I suppose you also think that women shouldn't be allowed to drive, vote, own property, open up their own bank accounts, or be out in public without a man.
I don't know where you're getting all this from. I'm not opposed to women's rights in general, I'm just opposed to killing people. Women can have all those other rights.
I support laws preventing pro-lifers from coming near abortion clinics.
Why? We're not hurting anyone by being there. We're not preventing people from going in and getting an abortion if that's what they want. People like Linda Gibbons and Mary Wagner have been imprisoned for doing nothing more than praying near abortion clinics. They did not physically or verbally assault the employees of the clinic or the women going in for whatever reason, nor did they prevent anyone who wanted to go in from going in. The only illegal thing they did was pray, which, if you believe in God, is a good thing to do. And even if you don't believe in God, it's still fairly harmless. And I thought you said earlier that you wanted abortion to be, in your words, safe, legal, and rare. If pro-lifers gathering near abortion clinics to pray and reach out to potential victims of abortion might help to reduce the number of abortions that happen, then this does not go against your stated goal of making abortion safe, legal, and rare. So why on earth would you oppose it?
Well, pro-lifers are very sexist, or at least the whole pro-life movement is inherently sexist, as it says the state should have control over a woman's body for 9 months. Most pro-life arguments say that birth control is solely a woman's responsibility, and that men can have all the sex they want without any consequences.
I'm not sexist. I don't want men to get abortions either. Last I checked, it takes 2 people to make a baby. I've heard a lot of pro-choice arguments. I've heard a lot of pro-life arguments, and I've never heard anyone say that men have no responsibility in this. And speaking of sexism, weren't you earlier saying that my opinion doesn't count because I'm a man? Sounds a lot like the pot calling the kettle black. You're probably one of those people who considers female genital mutilation to be sexist, but not male genital mutilation.
Hey, I thought you said we weren't going to talk about that.
Sorry, my bad, but that was kinda just begging to be said. Actually, being pro-life is the more feminist viewpoint for 2 reasons. First, the majority of the victims of abortion are girls. Second, having an abortion is usually more dangerous to a woman's health than giving birth. If you really cared about a woman's well-being and women's rights, you would be pro-life too. In fact, many pro-lifers are women.
Well, those women who are pro-life have internalized misogyny.
So you're saying these women hate themselves for being women? That's the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard. There's no such thing as internalized misogyny, okay? Women who are pro-life are the same as men who are pro-life. It has nothing to do with hate and everything to do with love.
Well, what about victims of rape and incest? Don't you think an exception should be made for them? No woman should be forced to raise a baby whose face reminds her of the man who raped her.
This is a long conversation, but I'm rather enjoying it, which is why I'm allowing you to stay. Why would I think that there should be exceptions for rape and incest? I'm pro-life, so the only exception I would allow is in the case where the life of the mother can only be saved by terminating the pregnancy. For example, if it were an ectopic pregnancy where the fetus lives in the fallopian tubes, endangering the woman's life, or if the mother had cancer and required chemotherapy to survive, and one of the unfortunate side effects of the chemotherapy is that the baby dies. I don't even consider that to be abortion, and generally, an emergency C-section can be performed in an attempt to save both lives. Rape is horrible, and I believe rapists should be punished to the maximum extent of the law. And I also think rapists should be forced to pay child support if their crime results in a pregnancy. But I do not think rape should have 2 victims. Most rape victims have chosen to keep their babies, knowing that what happened to them is not the baby's fault. Many of them consider the baby to be their own only and not the rapist's. Again, the toddler test comes into play here. What if a woman has consensual sex with her husband, gets pregnant, gives birth, and 5 years later, she realizes that her husband is an asshole, gets a divorce, and then decides that her child, who has done nothing wrong, reminds her of him a little too much and wants to have the choice to kill that child or those children. Also, rape is really hard to prove. A woman could have consensual sex and then later say she was raped just so people wouldn't judge her so harshly for choosing to have an abortion. And didn't you say earlier that you were pro-choice and not pro-abortion? The fact that you think rape and incest are valid reasons to have an abortion make you pro-abortion. Also, in response to the rape argument, let me point out that less than 1% of abortions are done on women who have become pregnant as a result of rape. So this is a marginal case, and it sounds like you're trying to use a marginal case to make a rule that applies to all cases. And for that reason, the rape argument doesn't make sense. Also, I think adoption is still a perfectly good choice for the woman if, even after giving birth, she still feels that the baby reminds her too much of the unfortunate circumstances under which she became pregnant. No matter the circumstances, either adoption or keeping the baby is always a better choice than abortion.
You say that now, but admit it, if your wife were raped and became pregnant as a result of that, you would want her to have an abortion.
No, actually, I wouldn't. I would want my wife to have the baby, and then she could choose whether to keep the baby or give him or her up for adoption. And she was aware of my position on this matter when we got married, and she agrees with me.
So then you want to give rapists parental rights?
Excuse me? When did I say that?
In order for someone to be forced to pay child support, it must be proved that he is the father. Once that is done, he can apply for and be granted other parental rights.
I said he should be forced to pay child support. I didn't say he should have other parental rights. When you intentionally make false claims like that, I will call you out on your bullshit.
Denying an abortion to a rape victim is pretty sick and horrible.
Well, you're pro-choice, so you're hardly in any position to pass a moral judgment on me. I find it rather hypocritical that those who say it's wrong to pass a moral judgment on anyone are passing a moral judgment on pro-lifers like me. Look, nothing is more sick and horrible than killing an innocent baby, no matter the circumstances under which the baby was conceived.
If you were a woman who was raped, you would not be so righteous about this.
Although there is no way for me to prove it, since I cannot become pregnant, I will still assert that you are wrong about this. I can never bring myself to kill another human being, especially my own children, whom I have a moral responsibility to protect, regardless of how they were conceived.
I'm sorry you're so closed-minded on this issue.
I'm not so closed-minded that nothing can get in, but I'm also not so open-minded that everything falls out. And you don't have to be sorry that I'm doing the right thing. Don't apologize for me. You're the one who's wrong.
In this male-dominated patriarchal society, women need all the empowerment they can get, and there is nothing more empowering than having an abortion. You're not a true feminist until you've had one.
So you're accusing me of being sexist when you're the one devaluing women who have chosen life. You want to think about that for a minute? Why shouldn't women who choose life be empowered?
Anti-abortion views should not be taught in schools, not even private schools, because it is a violation of laws against misogyny.
There is nothing misogynistic about being pro-life, and I think pro-life views should be taught in school. Your viewpoint is the one that technically constitutes hate speech, not mine. Ontario's former Minister of Education, Laurel Broughton, actually made this ridiculous claim as a consequence of an anti-bullying bill she passed through the legislature, known at the time as Bill 13. The bill in question did not mention the abortion issue at all, only that it prohibited bullying, harassment, discrimination, homophobia, racism, misogyny, etc., etc., etc. And she thinks the misogyny part applies to pro-lifers. This is a technique used by mental manipulators called projection, in which someone defends their own evil actions by falsely accusing their perceived enemies of doing the same evil thing. Abortion itself is misogynistic. Ontarians protested this abuse of power en masse, and Laurel Broughton eventually resigned in shame and moved to Nova Scotia. As far as I know, neither Dalton McGuinty nor Kathleen Wynne, former leaders of the Ontario Liberal Party, has ever apologized for Laurel Broughton's hateful comments, which is why we made Doug Ford our new premier. Hopefully he'll do better, although he has screwed up a couple of things, which I've emailed my MPP about.
Nobody actually supports abortion.
If nobody supported it, it wouldn't be funded with taxpayer dollars. People at Planned Parenthood actually encourage women to have abortions. They try to talk them into it if they're undecided.
So then you want to punish monetarily women who want to have control over their own bodies?
Oh, come on. Do you consider it a punishment if McDonald's charges you every time you get a Big Mac?
Buying a Big Mac at McDonald's is nothing like having an abortion. At least try to be serious.
I use analogies a lot. It's how I win debates.
So then, what is abortion to you? Is it a serious procedure with major ramifications that people with no other option are willing to perform themselves? Or is it just a trip to McBortions?
None of the above. I take issue with the no other option part. There are always other options.
Abortion should be legal because it's a traumatizing, emotionally stressful, life-changing decision that is never made lightly.
That sounds to me like a very good reason why it shouldn't be allowed.
But giving birth and making the decision to give the baby up for adoption is also traumatizing.
This trauma heals relatively quickly once the woman realizes she made the right choice. If she makes the wrong choice, it will be much more difficult to recover from the trauma.
So do you think Planned Parenthood should be defunded?
Yes. We as a society have no use for an organization that gets its money by murdering people and illegally selling their body parts, which they've been caught red-handed doing. And as for the other stuff Planned Parenthood does, there are other organizations that can do those things. Governments should not provide any funding for abortions either at Planned Parenthood or any similar facility. Many taxpayers oppose abortion and would not consent to having their tax dollars used for such an evil purpose. We do not want to be involved in any way with funding abortions, not even indirectly, especially while essential services such as dental care are not funded by the government. Paying for abortions amounts to being an accessory to murder.
But Planned Parenthood doesn't actually perform any abortions.
Yes, they do. They commit over 300,000 abortions every year. They're the biggest abortion provider in North America. They themselves admitted this. The fact that you say they don't means you're either seriously misinformed about this or you're lying. In fact, Planned Parenthood has broken the law by failing to report that some of their victims were pregnant as a result of rape. Some of them were raped by their fathers and forced to have an abortion. So, if you're so pro-choice and you care so much about a woman's right to choose, why do you support an organization like Planned Parenthood, which allows men who are rapists to force their victims to have an abortion? Newsflash, they're not all about choice, they're all about killing. Planned Parenthood is not a friendly organization. They lie to potential victims in order to increase their revenues. For example, they will claim that an embryo at 7 weeks has no arms, legs, head, brain, or heart, But they do in fact have all of these things by 7 weeks. It wasn't always this way. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, actually rejected abortion and promoted other means of birth control. Planned Parenthood only started committing abortions in the 1960s after she died. She was a racist, however, and hate breeds more hate, which is why Planned Parenthood is what it is today.
But abortions are only about 3% of what Planned Parenthood does, and they actually do a lot to prevent abortions, like providing birth control.
First of all, I doubt the accuracy of that 3% figure, as Planned Parenthood locations have been known to shut down in states that have more restrictive laws on abortion. This would not happen, in my opinion, if abortion was really a mere 3% of what they do. Secondly, if you want affordable birth control, condoms are cheap, and there are even some organizations that will give you free condoms if you need them. Thirdly, people who had formerly worked for Planned Parenthood, such as Abby Johnson, admit that abortion was the most lucrative, i.e. profitable, part of their business. Fourthly, even if abortion was 0.1% of what Planned Parenthood does, the fact remains that they are an abortion provider, and that's just wrong. It's like saying, what about all the good things Adolf Hitler did? Did Hitler ever do any good things? I don't know, probably, but all the bad things he did kind of overshadow that. He may have killed 30 million people, give or take, but shouldn't he receive some special recognition and praise even for the 5 billion or so people that he didn't kill?
Oh, I was wondering how long it would take before you brought up Hitler. That's Godwin's law, you know. Any sufficiently long debate, such as the one we're having now, will inevitably devolve into a comparison to Hitler.
Well, if you're doing something as bad as what Hitler did, then I totally have the right to make that comparison.
Why is there a group of old white guys sitting around making decisions about what I can and can't do with my own body? Abortion should remain legal because a woman controls her own body.
What have you got against old white guys? Do you perceive a problem relating to me because I'm not the same age as you, I'm not the same race as you, and I'm not the same gender as you? It would seem that if my age, race, and gender are a problem for you, then you are ageist, racist, and sexist. And yet, you seem to like Bernie Sanders so much even though he is, well, an old white guy. People of all ages, genders, and races can be pro-life. You've got old guys like Michael Corrin, young guys like Sam Osterhoff, old women like Linda Gibbons, and young women like Alyssa Galob. Anyone can be pro-life, and everyone should be pro-life. As for your own body, you can do whatever you want with your own body. You can get a tattoo or pierce your ears or other body parts if you want to, but that fetus is not part of your body, it's someone else's body. Half of the time this fetus has a penis. Are you saying that this penis is part of your body? You have a penis? He or she has different DNA than you do. The umbilical cord connects to the placenta, which also comes out at birth. You probably already knew this. Since you want to control your own body, how about not getting pregnant in the first place so that we don't even have to talk about abortion? Unless, of course, you actually are prepared to raise a baby properly, i.e. in such a way that the child lives.
You are not qualified to decide what a woman does with her own body.
That's a hypocritical assertion, given that you think you're qualified to decide whether another person lives or dies.
You're in no position to judge a woman who has to make one of the most difficult decisions in her life. Having an abortion is never a decision that is taken lightly.
First of all, I know for a fact that that is incorrect. While it may be relatively rare, there are women who use abortion as a method of birth control. Secondly, even if it is a very difficult and heartbreaking decision, that does not justify the action. Can you imagine if Paul Bernardo at his trial for multiple homicides had asked the judge for leniency in sentencing because killing those girls was one of the hardest decisions he ever had to make in his life?
I posted some really good points about this issue on your timeline on Facebook, and you deleted them because you don't want people to know how popular my point of view is.
That's complete bullshit. I deleted your hateful comments because I do not want my timeline to be cluttered with hate speech. If I didn't want people to know about your point of view, I wouldn't be making this video.
I think I know what your problem is. You don't just hate abortion, you hate vaginas.
What? At this point, some of you watching are probably thinking I made that up. I didn't. Rosemary Westwood, a writer from Metro, wrote an article accusing us of hating vaginas. Now, where did that come from? Let me be clear, as I always am. I don't hate vaginas. I was born from a vagina. I've had sex with a woman. I admire and love every part of a woman, including that part. I don't even hate Rosemary Westwood. I think she's confused and misguided or dishonest or both, but I don't hate her. What I hate is when doctors abuse their profession to stick tools of death into someone's vagina and then pull out a dead body. That is all. I think the more likely and obvious explanation is that you hate pro-lifers.
Having sex doesn't mean you don't hate women. You do hate women, just like you hate Muslims and Jews.
Again, I'm not clutching at straws here. When I went to the March for Life in Ottawa in 2017, I try to go every year, one of the counter-protesters there actually said this to me. There was nothing about hate, either on the sign I was holding, or on the clothes I was wearing, or in any of the things I was saying. The March for Life is organized by a group that is run by Christians, a religion that is based on love, not hate. But even atheists have been known to attend the march because, as I said earlier, even those who don't know God can still have a sense of morality. As for Jews and Muslims, it's quite possible that there were some of those at the March for Life as well, although it was hard to tell. In any case, I certainly don't hate them. I may hate some of their barbaric religious practices, like infant genital mutilation, but I do not hate them. Oh, and by the way, Ben Shapiro and Ray Comfort are both Jewish, so if I allegedly hate Jews so much, why do I have such respect for Ben Shapiro and Ray Comfort? It should be... the hat.
It should be legal to have an abortion before 20 weeks, as the brainwaves do not start until then.
A lack of consciousness does not mean that the baby isn't alive. A person can be in a coma and still be alive and come out of that coma. Even plants, like apple trees for instance, do not have brains, and yet science still says that they're alive. As for the fetus, it's highly likely that if you don't kill him or her, sooner or later he or she will have brain activity and will be able to do all of the things that living people can do.
Even if all the points you've made up to this point are valid, you still have to admit that you're a hypocrite because you only care about babies before they're born. After they're born, they're on their own. If you were really pro-life, you would support programs to help young unwed mothers so that they'd be better able to care for a baby. You're not pro-life, you're pro-birth or pro-forced birth.
When did I ever say I wasn't in support of such programs? You can't just try to destroy my argument by making false claims about what I do and don't support. It's a common misconception that pro-lifers only care about the unborn, although it isn't clear whether you actually believe that or you're just saying it to be a jerk. I care about people at all stages of life, actually, but the preborn and newborn babies are the ones who suffer the most injustice, which is why I focus particular attention on people at these early stages of life. I do think parents should get the resources they need to give a baby a good upbringing, and I will support any pro-life politician who does this. And I would be happy to donate money to charities that support such women. So there's no hypocrisy on my end here. In fact, many pro-lifers do not subscribe to such hypocrisies. I suggest you look up consistent life ethic on Wikipedia. This is an ideology that I subscribe to.
I think doctors should be required by law to perform abortions upon request.
Absolutely not. Even if I were pro-choice, this would still be a bad idea because many doctors who have consciences would refuse. If their licenses are taken away as a result, a lot of people will be struggling to get actual health care. You can't claim to be a champion of freedom of choice while denying doctors the freedom to choose not to commit an abortion. I would also apply that same argument to doctors who refuse to commit euthanasia.
If a woman should be forced to give birth to a baby, then should people also be forced to donate a kidney to their child in order to save their life?
I don't know any parent who would refuse to donate a kidney to save their child's life, assuming they'd still have one working kidney left, and I wouldn't want to know such a person. The practical difference here is that with abortion, you're making a conscious decision to go out of your way to kill a baby who otherwise might have lived.
I wish Mike Pence had been aborted.
Really? I could spend some time talking about how much of an asshole you are for wishing harm on a fellow human being, even one that you disagree with. But since it's Mike Pence, I'll just point out the inconsistency in your statement. Mike Pence is a person. He has a name. If a person becomes a person only upon birth, then it wouldn't make sense for you to refer to a fetus by his name.
A fetus isn't sentient, so it won't even know it's been aborted.
By that logic, if I kill you now, you won't know you're dead either, because you'll be dead.
Unlike me, you don't care about minimizing human suffering.
Have you even been listening? The whole point of being pro-life is to minimize human suffering. Abortion causes more physical and emotional suffering than giving birth does, regardless of whether or not you choose to give the baby up for adoption after that. Carrying a baby to term not only minimizes suffering, but also maximizes joy.
If you vote for right-wing candidates who are racist, elitist, and homophobic just because they oppose abortion, then you are a single-issue voter. One ought to vote for candidates based on a wide variety of different issues.
I agree that these are all important issues, but none of it is more important than protecting the lives of unborn babies. I'm not a single-issue voter. If there are two pro-life candidates to choose from, then I would vote for the one whose views on other issues are more moderate. One might also be inclined to vote for whichever pro-life candidate has the best chance of beating out the pro-choice candidates. I'm not a big fan of strategic voting, which is why, if you've seen my other YouTube videos, you know I advocate for a system of ranked balloting. This is something even pro-choicers should be able to get behind.
Why do you believe life begins before the heart starts beating?
Because it does. Plants don't have a heartbeat, but they are still alive. But even if I gave you this and agreed that life, or at least human life, begins when the heart starts beating, seeing as life is considered to have stopped when the heart stops beating and can't be restarted, then there should be no question that abortion after this point is murder. And at that point in time, before the heart starts beating, you know that if left to its natural processes, the heart will start beating. That baby is very much alive and hopefully will have a long life ahead of him or her.
Do you know what's worse than abortion? Unplanned pregnancy.
No, pregnancy is never worse than abortion, even if it's unplanned. That is my personal opinion, and it's an opinion that's based partly on the Declaration of Independence, as mentioned earlier in this video, and partly on human decency, something pro-abortionists like yourself lack. The fact that you think it is shows that you're pro-abortion, a label which you earlier denied applies to you.
Banning abortion will just cause more abortions to occur.
I've already demonstrated how the opposite of that is true. And since you earlier stated that abortion was okay, I wouldn't trust you to be an expert on how to effectively reduce the number of abortions.
Abortion is necessary to combat the growing problem of overpopulation. There simply aren't enough resources on this planet to support a growing population.
That's what people used to think 300 years ago, when the population was significantly smaller than it is now. Since then, the population has skyrocketed, and we're still doing fine as a species thanks to improvements in agriculture and medicine. The only reason some people are starving is because their governments are corrupt and are withholding food from them. Overpopulation is a myth. There is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed.
The fact that there are people who think unborn children should have the right to use their mother's body without her consent saddens me.
I'm sorry my opinion saddens you, but I must stand firm in my commitment to protect innocent life, because to do otherwise would sadden me. Also, given your callous lack of regard for the well-being of the unborn, I don't see why I should even care about your feelings.
Abortion should remain legal because my vagina is too pretty to let a fetus crawl out.
Whether you find something pretty or not has no bearing on the morality of killing a person. But if you really want to stoop to that level, try this. A fetus is too pretty to tear apart before ripping it out of a vagina.
Abortion should be legal because otherwise people will produce as many babies as possible as a career so they never have to work, and thus become a major strain on social services and healthcare systems.
I highly doubt it will have that effect. Most people will still recognize that babies cost money, and if they can't afford to take care of a baby themselves, they may opt to give that baby up for adoption. I don't think very many people would go to all the trouble of carrying a baby to term just to give it up for adoption as a way of life. And most of these babies will eventually grow up to become good, productive citizens who work hard, pay taxes, vote, and contribute to the betterment of society. You can't use the odd exception to justify the vast majority of abortions.
Adoption isn't that simple. The father also has to consent to adoption. What do you think the odds of that are if he's a rapist?
I would think it's very likely he'd consent to adoption, since he would otherwise have to pay child support.
Tell that to my rapist who was planning to petition the court to give him the child I was carrying.
No court would have just given a child to a rapist.
Instead of banning abortion, banning Viagra would be more effective.
I don't think banning Viagra is a good solution. Most people who take Viagra actually are ready to become parents. This is no different from people who can have normal sex lives and make babies without the assistance of Viagra.
If you were really pro-life, you would value the life of the pregnant person and her right to terminate the pregnancy if she wants.
No, being pro-life doesn't work that way. Stop pretending you're the good guy here. I'm actually not opposed to terminating pregnancies. I just think all pregnancies should be terminated by giving birth to a live and healthy baby if possible.
You don't care. You just like to tell me that I'm going to hell for having an abortion.
First of all, I never said you were going to hell. If you truly repent and believe, you can be saved. And if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't be trying to talk you out of making the worst mistake of your life.
Why do most pro-lifers oppose better access to birth control, food stamps, and anything that may reroute their taxes from supporting multi-billion-dollar corporations?
When did I ever say I was against better access to birth control and food stamps, or that I want my taxes to support big corporations? Oh, that's right, I didn't. Stop blaming me for shit other people do, and stop assuming Oh, Jimmy disagrees with me on issue X, therefore he must also disagree with me on issues Y and Z.
I know people who were abandoned as babies and wished their mothers had chosen abortion.
There are also people who are glad their mothers didn't choose abortion. Again, you shouldn't use these rare situations to justify the vast majority of abortions.
Men simply do not understand all of the circumstances that contribute to a woman wanting to choose abortion.
You don't get to decide what I do or do not understand. I think the points that have been made in this video so far prove that my understanding of the issue is vastly greater than yours.
Abortion laws have no place in a civilized society.
How can you call this a civilized society if we won't even offer legal protection to the unborn?
Abortion should at least be allowed before the fetus starts being able to feel pain.
I disagree, but if feeling pain is really the issue, then is it okay to kill someone if it can be done in such a way that the victim doesn't feel pain?
You should just trust women to make the reproductive choices that are right for them.
I would trust any woman who chose life. I do not and should not trust the other option.
I think the only person who should be allowed to make a decision about abortion is the individual in question.
Okay, but if the individual in question is the unborn baby, then that's not really the person making the decision, is it?
Making abortion illegal will just make abortions more dangerous for both the mother and the fetus.
Do you want to think about what you just said for a minute?
No, how about you think about it?
Well, at least one of us is thinking.
You know, abortion is natural. Even animals kill their own young.
Most species of animals that commit infanticide will not kill their own offspring. They typically kill the offspring of their desired mates so as to free them up for sexy time. But even if they did, the fact that animals do it doesn't make it okay. Animals also commit rape, kidnapping, and murder. Even the cute ones.
Abortion isn't murder, it's a medical procedure. Your opinion on the matter isn't trumping the facts, sweetie.
The fact that the perpetrators of this atrocity went to medical school doesn't make it any less evil. The same with that other thing I'm not supposed to talk about. It's still murder. If some person with a lab coat and a stethoscope breaks into your house and stabs you to death with medical tools while you're sleeping, does that make it a medical procedure? Your opinion isn't trumping the facts either.
Sometimes if the baby is going to die anyway due to a debilitating medical condition, it's more merciful to have an abortion than to allow the baby to suffer.
First, there are painkillers that can be used to relieve suffering. Second, it has been known to happen, albeit rare, that such conditions are misdiagnosed. If the baby is going to die, it's better to let it happen naturally than to actively kill the baby.
3 of my children have had abortions. It breaks my heart, but I still love them very much. Now I have a grandson.
As you should, but maybe the reason they had abortions is because their mother never taught them right from wrong. And you actually have lots of grandchildren, just most of them are dead.
The ability to feel joy, sadness, anger, and hatred are an integral part of our human beingness, and we do not learn to develop such sophisticated emotions until we start socially interacting with others.
No, that's simply not true. All that's required to be a human being is to be an organism whose DNA is that of a human being. And the fact that an embryo will eventually develop into someone who will have these emotions, even if he or she doesn't have them yet, is enough to make this person a human being with the inherent right to life.
You keep talking about the right to life, but an equal case could be made that an unwanted fetus has a right not to live. Some people commit suicide because they don't like living.
I'm not a big fan of suicide. I've lost a friend to suicide, and it sucks. But even if suicide is a choice, it's a choice that's made by the person who wants to die, not by another person, such as the person's mother. You can't know in advance whether or not an unborn baby will want to live or die, so you shouldn't make that choice for them.
People also have the right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. Since fetuses cannot believe, speak, or assemble, they cannot have any of these rights and are therefore not human beings.
Lacking certain abilities does not make a person not human. Being unable to exercise some rights does not mean a person shouldn't have any rights.
Abortion is okay because most fertilized eggs die within the first couple of weeks of pregnancy anyway due to genetic defects or whatnot. So at that stage of pregnancy, it's not really a human being, but just auditioning to become a human being.
These spontaneous abortions are a sad reality, but it does not justify killing an unborn baby who may or may not have such defects and who would otherwise have lived.
I've noticed that pro-lifers tend to confuse the adjective human with the noun human being. I think this is a deliberate attempt to confuse us. It won't work.
I'm not confusing anything. I checked the dictionary, and I am allowed to use the word human as a noun that means the same thing as human being.
Pro-lifers typically say that an embryo has a soul from the moment of conception. But sometimes an embryo splits into two embryos and becomes identical twins, and sometimes those two twins recombine into a single embryo. When that happens, which soul is lost? The question is unintelligible if they even have souls to begin with, and moot otherwise.
You know, the Bible doesn't actually say anything about embryos recombining, so no person on earth is going to give an answer that they know 100% to be correct. My theory is that if the embryos recombine, the souls also recombine. However, we are wading into religious waters again, as the concept of a soul is typically based on religion, and I've been trying to avoid that since most of my opponents are not Christians. Furthermore, regardless of the existence or absence of one or more souls in identical twins, abortion at any stage of pregnancy is still not justified. You can't rightly say that it's okay to have an abortion at some point because you're not 100% sure whether or not the fetus or embryo has a soul at that point. Some people reject the concept of souls altogether. Do these people believe murder at any stage in life is therefore justified? I hope not. There'd be a lot of psychopaths running around.
Since most of who we are as people is defined by our experiences and our environment, and not just by our genes, we are not yet ourselves at conception, and we have had no experiences to define us.
By that logic, you're not the same person now that you were yesterday, because yesterday you did not yet have the experiences in the past 24 hours that partially define who you are now. And by that same logic, you don't need to worry about what will happen to you tomorrow, since tomorrow you won't even be the same person that you are now. See how ridiculous that sounds?
You are oppressing half of the world's population.
How do you figure? Are you assuming all women want to have abortions? Truthfully, I'm not oppressing anyone. But if denying an abortion to a woman who wants one somehow counts as oppression, then I'm still only oppressing at most 1/6 of the world's population, and hopefully a lot less.
The fact that you keep arguing with me just proves that you know I'm right and you're wrong.
What the hell sense does that make? Why would I argue a point that I knew was wrong? If I thought I was wrong, I'd say something else that I thought was right. If I thought you were right, I'd be agreeing with you rather than proving you wrong. What a stupid thing to say.
Like I could give a shit less what a scumbag with your views thinks.
It's hard to be sure exactly what you mean here because your grammar is so horrible, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you're implying that my views make me a scumbag. Nope, Chuck Testa. There are lots of good, decent people who are pro-life. Your insults mean nothing to me, and if you really didn't care what I think, you wouldn't be here.
Anonymous birth should be possible, so that people are less inclined to fatally abandon their babies in dumpsters, etc.
You know, that's a good idea. It's the first sensible thing you've said so far. The existence or absence of such a system still doesn't justify abortion in any way.
So how do you feel about the morning after pill?
I'm against it for reasons already stated earlier.
But the morning after pill just prevents an egg from being fertilized in the first place. So how is that murder?
That's not the only thing the morning after pill does. It can also prevent a fertilized egg from attaching to the uterus. A person who has taken the morning after pill even admitted this.
But it's not really abortion because you don't even know if that egg is fertilized or not.
Not knowing doesn't make it okay. A person who puts on a blindfold and randomly shoots a gun into a crowd of people may or may not hit somebody. That doesn't mean it's not murder. Also, blowing up a building that may or may not be occupied may still be murder if it turns out there were people in that building, whether or not you knew about them at the time.
But at that point, it's merely a blastocyst, not even a fetus. If you consider a fertilized egg that hasn't attached to the uterus to be a baby, and you believe in God, then God is the biggest abortionist of them all. Since only about half of these fertilized eggs ever make it to the uterus.
The fact that these things sometimes happen naturally doesn't give you any moral right to cause them to happen. As a Christian, I believe that God sometimes calls his children home for reasons that aren't clear to us here on earth. But that doesn't make it okay for you to shed innocent blood.
Abortion is okay because fetuses aren't old enough to know that they're being aborted.
When you get right down to it, dead people don't know anything because their brains have stopped working. So by that logic, murder in any circumstance is okay since the victim will never know he or she is dead.
Your faith is a heavier influence on you than science when determining what constitutes a viable human life.
Where did you get that notion? I already explained earlier in this video how science does determine what constitutes a human life. Also, I noticed you sneakily stuck the word viable in there, as if viability has anything to do with it. I've already destroyed the viability argument. In fact, the word viable does not occur anywhere in the Bible. And again, you're the one who keeps bringing faith into this discussion. I am religious, that is true, but for the purpose of this debate, I am arguing from a secular point of view.
That's not even what I said. You misread.
Your exact words were, and I quote, "Your faith is a heavier influence on you than science when determining what constitutes a viable human life." I didn't misread. You miswrote.
What's the point of being pro-life if the baby is just going to be killed anyway after birth by some child abuser?
I don't even know where you're coming from with that. Not every child gets killed or abused. I'm against child abuse just as much as I am against abortion. Can't both be wrong?
You're so ignorant on this issue. You really should educate yourself, but you don't want to know why most women choose abortions. You're too young to have a valid opinion.
How do you figure? I've literally spent the past 2 hours debunking all of your arguments. What could I possibly still be missing? By the way, the too young to have a valid opinion line was dropped on me when I was around 25 years old. I'm 41 now, so now is my opinion valid? The too young argument is just as laughable as the too old argument presented earlier in this video.
I've saved my best argument for last. This is the one that you can't win. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. If you were inside a fertility clinic and the place suddenly caught fire, and in one corner of the room is a 5-year-old boy, and in the other corner is a bunch of test tubes containing fertilized embryos, and you could only save one, which would you save? I've asked this question of many pro-lifers, and none of them has ever given me an honest answer, and none of them ever will.
I highly doubt no pro-lifer has ever given an honest answer to this question. I would probably save the 5-year-old.
Aha! I got you with this one. By saving the 5-year-old instead of the embryos, you're acknowledging that the embryos aren't as valuable, and you have thus proved yourself to be a liar with regards to the value of an embryo's life.
No, you're wrong as usual. The embryos are just as valuable, but society expects me to save the toddler if possible, and in the heat of the moment, I'm likely to consider other factors besides the value of the life I'm saving, such as the immediate consequences of my actions. So your argument doesn't even come close to proving what you claim it proves. Moral instincts do not mean that you've completely thought the situation through. Ben Shapiro gives a more thorough answer to this hypothetical scenario, and I would highly recommend watching it.
The way you're debating isn't fair. You keep shutting me down, and you're not answering any of my questions. None of what you say is relevant. You keep comparing apples to oranges. You're just being mean.
I've been letting you talk. I've answered every single one of your questions, and all of my points were relevant. Probably even more so than yours. I'm not talking about apples or oranges, I'm talking about people. You just don't like my answers, and you're just mad because I'm winning. I'm honest, stubborn, and blunt, but not mean. In my experience, pro-choicers tend to dismiss all of our valid arguments as invalid just because they don't agree with us.
There's no point debating with you. Every argument you've presented is riddled with straw men and other logical fallacies, and your logic is terrible. You're ridiculous.
Again, you're wrong. Every argument I've presented is rock solid. You're only saying that because you don't agree with me, and you're mad because you're losing. You're the one whose logic is terrible. I've provided proof of my claims every time you've asked.
Whatever. You're a faggot. I'm going to block you now. Bzz.
Well, that concludes this video.
What? Wait, I'm not done yet. I have lots of super awesome rebuttals to all of your arguments. You haven't seen the last of me.
Oh, I'm sure about that. No matter how many good arguments I give in favor of life, there will always be someone trying to use some lame excuse to justify abortion. If you're really not done debating me, then why did you block me? Pro-choicers tend to claim that most pro-life arguments are sexist. But I think if you paid careful attention and even wrote down some of the things I've said, you will find that none of what I said is sexist. Okay, so post your weak rebuttals in the comments, and I will refute them in my sequel, which may be released at some unknown date in the future. If you were pro-choice before watching this, I hope this is making you reconsider your standpoint. And if you were pro-life before watching this, I hope this video helped to give you the tools you need to successfully debate the pro-choicers. If you liked the video, please upvote it, bookmark it, share it, comment on it, and watch my other YouTube videos. And if you hated the video, please downvote it, share it, tell all your friends how much you hated it, and watch all of my other YouTube videos so you'll know what else you should hate me for. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I did try to cover the abortion debate from every possible angle, and I refuted every pro-choice argument I've ever heard. But on the off chance some pro-choicer watches this and says, "Hey, I have a point to make that wasn't covered in this video," then I will be glad to make a sequel in which I refute all of the new pro-choice arguments. I don't imagine it will be very hard. There are some things I've heard from pro-choicers during debates that I didn't include in this video because they hardly count as arguments, merely tangents. And hey, if you need me to speak at any pro-life events, or even to be a pro-life speaker at an event that's primarily attended by pro-choicers, by all means, send me a message and I will be happy to discuss this with you.